The channel is almost at 50,000 subscribers. Hit that button if you haven't already, it would mean a lot. Since the beginning of 2024, Boeing has been, quite frankly, unable to get out of the headlines, whether for relevant reasons such as maybe a new quality problem or audits into its production processes. However, one thing that has also crept in is the element of headlines concerning Boeing that are also not relevant. You know, those breaking news stories when a plane hits turbulence and it just so happens to be a 737-800. So immediately, what does this mean? It must break the 6 o'clock news as the feature story. Ultimately, this type of coverage is certainly exaggerated, and a telling tale, really, of the place Boeing finds itself in. That media pounces on the opportunity to cover, say, minuscule things such as what I touched on that don't actually concern Boeing or the safety integrity of their jets. Still, because the manufacturer's name is attached to the said aircraft, it immediately means, at least to the general public nowadays, that they're at fault. Why though? What on earth causes such a dramatic shift? Well, let me first discuss reputation. In the mid to late 1900s, Boeing's image significantly differed from today's. It might be hard to imagine, but it genuinely was the case. Not only if you ask around, but watch documentaries, do some research, and a whole lot more, you'll be able to better understand that Boeing was a company associated with significant levels of pride. If you were seen wearing that uniform around your city, people knew you were doing great things. Could the same be argued today, at least for the commercial airplanes division? I won't answer that, I'll let you ponder that, but I feel you probably know the answer. Boeing's rapid downfall across the last, say, half a decade has seen its reputation continuously drop, from once was a leading manufacturer to, yes, still technically one, as say no one's taken over Boeing per se, but Boeing has experienced their struggles, and rival competitor Airbus has certainly advanced ahead. Today, despite struggles, they're plodding along, but the 737 MAX incidents of the late 2010s certainly ignited a flame that since probably hasn't been repaired, especially following 2024's developments thus far. The late 2010 incidents were directly sourced from decisions that occurred earlier than that, but really only culminated in these crashes, identifying so many problems, and as a result, Boeing's reputation dropped off a cliff. Many argue, though, that the reputation drop happened before the summer in the camp of, yes, the 737 MAX, but before the 2000s, many point towards the merger with McDonnell Douglas and the subsequent shakeup that occurred from this point forward. As a result, Boeing's focus on building quality aircraft, while present arguably, wasn't at the forefront anymore, with a more considerable emphasis on the stock market, financials, and how big of a profit they were reeling in on a yearly basis. I like to always say that focusing on the financial side of a business isn't inherently wrong. That's obviously a cornerstone to making a successful company. You need to make sure this is performing well, but to see the safety of planes drop in favor of a full focus on financials is where the problems obviously start creeping in. Ultimately, this shift towards profits over culture, a big word talked about when discussing Boeing, following the merger, later resulted in Boeing's push to find ways to maximize its profits as much as possible, but also as quickly as possible. It would then be the birth of the A320neo that would send Boeing into basically overdrive. They needed a response, obviously, but a clean sheet would take too long to release. And in the case of a company focusing on finances, it would also cost too much. Why not push the limits of the 737 further if it was possible, maybe even a bit too far, and cut corners around certification to ensure that ground wasn't lost to Airbus? Decisions such as these, which would later come to light, definitely saw the brand image take a toll. And I do think that is the perfect way to transition into the next area. Brand image. A direct consequence of the reputation dropping is also the effects felt on the brand's image. Some would go as far as argue that the Boeing name, logo, and associated things are tainted. While the early 2020s were certainly filled with the pandemic and related supply chain difficulties, behind the scenes this gave Boeing a chance to right its wrongs, really take a step back and understand where it had messed up and to ensure this didn't happen again. Boeing needed to rebuild rebuild, and while no one can ever forget, moving on from certain moments, such as what we saw in the latter stages of the 2010s, is still important. And over a 5-year period, despite little hiccups from the outside looking in, it did generally seem, and I use generally very loosely because there were little niggles, but generally things were still improving, and you'd probably argue that the reputation with regards to the MAX and the flying public was beginning to rebuild. Many people argued that with the amount of rigorous testing the MAX had to undergo to re-enter service, it was arguably one of the safer planes in the sky. But see, at the beginning of 2024, when a door blowout incident occurred, much more was revealed again about the problems internally that quite clearly had not been sorted across a 4 to 5 year period. Boeing's brand image basically every week continues to drop to an all-time low. Just when you think there couldn't be something else, Boeing comes out and says that they may have skipped inspections on the 787 and employees falsifying key records. So when you look at the headlines, they're a very easy target. And therefore, it's pretty easy to throw the company under the bus for clicks if something happens with one of their aircraft that is completely unrelated to the safety or integrity of the build. This is toxic media to consume, but it certainly speaks volumes about where Boeing is at. So why are they in the headlines? Well, you can look towards the critical problems at the company in 2024 as being a start, but really there are far deep-rooted issues, such as those quality difficulties, production problems, the subsequent lack of trust in the manufacturer that is present, maybe even because of the history of Boeing across the last decade that has left a sour taste in the mouth of many. If you look back even further, many people will cite to you the McDonnell-Douglas merger as really being the tipping point. But for all intensive purposes, I'll stick to really focusing on the last 5 to 10 years as the reason why Boeing is facing such media adversity. That is also the role of the media, to paint things out far worse than they are, and they'll get clicks, generate negative attention, and that will cascade to forums, social media, when discussing with a member of the public, and much more. It's over to you. I'd love to hear your opinion on why you believe Boeing is continuously in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Yes, like I said, there are the completely valid points with regards to quality issues, but maybe if turbulence hits an aircraft and then Boeing is plastered as being in the wrong, why do you think this is? Is it because of what's been happening in the last 5 years, or do you think this is the media being the media? Either way, it's something I really wanted to explore because I know as an aviation enthusiast, seeing Boeing in the position they're in is incredibly frustrating. But what becomes even more frustrating is when you see media discussing stories on Boeing that simply have nothing to do with the manufacturer. Thanks a lot for tuning into this video. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in a couple of days for your latest analysis.
And we'll fly.